I never thought my daughter's wedding would change my life. But when the groom's estranged uncle walked through those doors, our eyes met across the reception hall, and everything I believed about my future shattered. I was a widower. He was grieving too. Neither of us was looking for this. If you have ever found true love when you least expected it, please like and subscribe for more romantic stories. The invitation sat on my kitchen counter for 3 months before the wedding. Cream cardstock with elegant script announcing that my daughter Ivy would marry Fletcher Donovan on the second Saturday in June. I ran my thumb across the embossed lettering every morning while I made coffee, still not quite believing it. Ivy had been my whole world since her mother died 6 years ago. Breast cancer. It took Renee in 11 brutal months, leaving me alone in our house in Evansville, Indiana, with a heartbroken 20-year-old daughter who'd just lost her best friend. I threw myself into work after that. I managed a regional distribution center for agricultural equipment, coordinating shipments across the Midwest. The job kept me busy 60 hours a week, which was exactly what I needed. Evenings I spent alone, microwaving dinners and watching whatever was on television until I could justify going to bed. Ivy had worried about me. She'd moved back home for a year after Renee died, commuting to her teaching job in Bloomington, rather than leave me alone. I'd finally convinced her I was fine, that she needed to live her life. She'd moved into an apartment near Indiana University, started dating, started healing. Then she met Fletcher. He was a civil engineer with the county, quiet and thoughtful with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. I liked him immediately. He treated Ivy with the sort of gentle respect that made my chest tight with gratitude. They'd been together 2 years when he proposed on a hiking trip through Turkey Run State Park. The wedding was set for early June at a restored barn venue outside Newburgh, 20 minutes south of Evansville. Ivy had thrown herself into planning with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen since before Renee got sick. She texted me photos of centerpieces and asked my opinion on signature cocktails and debated the merits of string quartets versus bluegrass bands. I went along with all of it, pleased to see her happy, but emotionally I felt like I was watching from underwater, everything muffled and distant. The morning of the wedding, I put on the charcoal suit Ivy had helped me pick out. She'd taken me to a men's store in Evansville's Haney's Corner district, insisted I needed something tailored instead of the off-the-rack navy blazer I'd worn to every formal event for 15 years. The salesman had measured me efficiently while Ivy evaluated fabric swatches. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting my tie. The suit fit well. I looked like someone who had his life together. I wondered if that would ever feel true again. The venue was beautiful. The barn had been restored with care. Original beams exposed overhead, market lights strung in swooping arcs across the ceiling. Ivy had chosen late spring wildflowers for the arrangements. Daisies and black-eyed Susans and purple coneflowers that reminded me of the fields around our house. I arrived early and stood in the parking area, watching vendors carry in the final deliveries. The caterer unloaded covered trays. The florist directed assistants hauling buckets of additional arrangements. A string quartet set up chairs in the corner designated for the ceremony. Ivy appeared from the bridal suite in the adjacent building, still in jeans and a t-shirt, her hair in rollers. She spotted me and hurried over, face bright with excitement. "Dad, you look amazing," she said, straightening my tie even though it was already straight. "How are you feeling?" "Good," I said. "Proud. You're really doing this." "I really am." Her eyes shimmered. "Mom would have loved this." "She would have," I agreed, my throat tightening. "She'd be so happy for you." Ivy hugged me hard, then pulled back, blinking rapidly. "Okay, I can't cry yet. I haven't done my makeup. I just wanted to check on you. The ceremony starts at 4. You'll walk me down the aisle?" "Wouldn't miss it." She kissed my cheek and hurried back toward the bridal suite. I watched her go, this woman who used to be my little girl, about to start a whole new chapter. The ceremony was at 4. I walked Ivy down the aisle as sunlight streamed through the barn's high windows, illuminating dust motes floating in the air. She was radiant in a simple lace gown, her mother's pearl earrings gleaming. I placed her hand in Fletcher's and took my seat in the front row, my chest aching with a complicated mix of joy and loss. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves. Fletcher's voice shook when he promised to love Ivy for the rest of his life. Ivy cried openly while she spoke about finding home in another person. I thought about Renee, about the vows we'd exchanged 28 years ago in a small church ceremony neither of us could afford, but both of us desperately wanted. Then it was over. They were married. Everyone applauded. The couple walked back down the aisle together, beaming. And guests rose to make their way to the cocktail hour on the barn's wraparound porch. I stood, shaking hands with people I half recognized, accepting congratulations, making small talk about how beautiful everything looked. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of social obligation. I nursed a bourbon, chatted with Ivy's college friends, thanked the caterer, complimented the flowers. The reception began at 6. Guests filed into the barn, now transformed with long tables covered in white linens, centerpieces glowing with candlelight, the market lights overhead twinkling like stars. I found my seat at the head table, relieved to have a designated place to be. That's when he walked in. I noticed him immediately because he entered alone, slightly late, looking uncertain. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with broad shoulders under a well-cut navy blazer, dark hair threaded with gray, trimmed neatly. He had a strong jaw and an expression that seemed both guarded and gentle at the same time. He paused just inside the entrance, scanning the room. Our eyes met. It was like being struck by lightning. I'm not prone to exaggeration, but there's no other way to describe it. Our gazes locked and everything else fell away. The noise of the reception faded. The room seemed to narrow until there was only him, looking at me with the same startled intensity I felt. The moment stretched. I couldn't look away. Neither could he. Then someone stepped between us, blocking my view, and the spell broke. I blinked, disoriented, my heart hammering. What the hell was that? I looked down at my bourbon, trying to collect myself. When I glanced up again, the man was being greeted by Fletcher's parents across the room. Fletcher's mother hugged him stiffly. His father shook his hand with a tight expression. I leaned toward the woman next to me, one of Ivy's aunts. "Who's that?" I asked, nodding toward the late arrival. She followed my gaze. "Oh, that's Fletcher's uncle. His dad's younger brother. I think his name is Larry. He's been out of touch with the family for years. I'm surprised he came, honestly. There's some kind of rift." Larry. I watched him navigate the awkward reunion with Fletcher's parents. He looked uncomfortable but determined, like he was forcing himself to be there despite knowing he wasn't entirely welcome. Fletcher spotted him and his face lit up. He excused himself from a conversation and crossed the room quickly, pulling Larry into a genuine hug. Larry's expression softened. They spoke briefly, Fletcher's hand on his uncle's shoulder, both of them smiling. Then Ivy joined them. Fletcher introduced her, and Larry shook her hand warmly, saying something that made her laugh. She gestured toward the head table, toward me, and said something else. Larry's gaze flicked in my direction. Our eyes met again. Same jolt, same breathless intensity. Ivy was leading him over. My pulse skyrocketed. "Dad," Ivy said brightly, arriving at my side with Larry in tow. "This is Fletcher's uncle, Larry. Larry, this is my dad, Monroe." I stood automatically, extending my hand. "Nice to meet you." "You too." His grip was firm, his palm warm. His eyes were hazel, I realized. Gold and green and brown all at once. "Congratulations." "Ivy's wonderful." "She is," I managed. We were still shaking hands. I became aware of it and let go abruptly. Larry just moved back to Indiana, Ivy continued, oblivious to whatever strange current was running between us. He's been in Oregon for a long time. We're so glad he could make it. Wouldn't have missed it, Larry said, his gaze still on me. Someone called Ivy's name. She excused herself with an apologetic smile, leaving us standing there. I should find my seat, Larry said after a beat. Right. Yes. He hesitated, then moved away, heading toward a table on the far side of the room. I sat down heavily, my legs unsteady. Dinner was served. I barely tasted it. I was hyper-aware of Larry across the room, seated with Fletcher's extended family. I told myself not to look. I looked anyway. Twice I found him already watching me. Each time we both looked away quickly, like teenagers caught staring. This was insane. I didn't even know this man, and yet my entire body felt attuned to his presence like a compass pointing north. After dinner came the toasts. Fletcher's best man told a rambling story about a disastrous camping trip. Ivy's maid of honor made everyone cry talking about their friendship. Then it was my turn. I stood, my hands shaking slightly as I picked up my glass. I'd prepared a few remarks, practiced them that morning, but when I opened my mouth, what came out was entirely unscripted. When Ivy was born, I said, my voice rough, Renee and I had no idea what we were doing. We were terrified, but we figured it out together. We built a life, a family. I paused, swallowing hard. Renee's not here to see this, and that breaks my heart. But I know she'd be so proud. Ivy, you've grown into an extraordinary woman. And Fletcher, thank you for loving my daughter the way she deserves to be loved. My eyes stung. I raised my glass. To Ivy and Fletcher, everyone echoed the toast. I sat down quickly, blinking back tears. The dancing started. Ivy and Fletcher took the floor for their first dance, swaying to a song I didn't recognize. Then I was expected to dance with Ivy for the father-daughter dance. She'd chosen Isn't She Lovely by Stevie Wonder, one of Renee's favorites. I held my daughter and tried not to fall apart. I love you. Dad, she whispered. Love you too, sweetheart. When the song ended, she kissed my cheek and released me to general dancing. I retreated to the bar, ordered another bourbon, and tried to regulate my breathing. That was a beautiful toast. I turned. Larry stood beside me, hands in his pockets. Thank you, I said. Can I buy you a drink? He asked. Well, technically it's an open bar, but you know what I mean. Despite everything, I smiled. Sure. We stood at the bar together while the bartender refreshed my bourbon and poured Larry a gin and tonic. The silence between us wasn't awkward exactly, but it was charged with something I didn't have a name for. So you just moved back to Indiana? I asked, grasping for neutral territory. About 2 months ago, he said. I was in Portland for 18 years, but it was time to come home. What brought you back? His expression shifted, something painful crossing his face. My partner died last year. Cancer. After that, Portland felt like a place full of ghosts. I needed a fresh start. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'm so sorry. Thank you. He took a sip of his drink. Fletcher mentioned your wife passed away. I'm sorry for your loss, too. 6 years ago, I said. Also cancer. We looked at each other. In his eyes, I saw my own grief reflected back. The particular exhaustion of having survived something you didn't think you could survive. It's strange, isn't it? Larry said quietly. Being at a wedding, all this hope and joy and new beginnings when you're still living in the wreckage of an ending. Yes, I breathed. Exactly that. The connection between us intensified, deepened. This wasn't just attraction, I realized. This was recognition. He understood something fundamental about me that most people couldn't. Do you want to get some air? He asked. I should have said no. I should have made an excuse, stayed at the reception, kept my distance. Instead, I said yes. We walked out onto the porch. The June evening was warm and clear. Fireflies blinking in the fields beyond the parking area. Music drifted from inside the barn, laughter and conversation creating a pleasant backdrop. Larry leaned against the railing, looking out at the darkening landscape. I stood beside him, acutely aware of the foot of space between us. "I almost didn't come," he admitted. "Fletcher and I are close, but the rest of the family and I haven't spoken in years. There was a falling out when I came out. My brother said some things that can't be unsaid. Fletcher was the only one who stayed in touch." "That must have been hard." "It was, but it also taught me who actually mattered." He glanced at me. "I'm glad I came, though, despite the awkwardness." "I'm glad you came too," I said, and meant it more than I should. Our eyes met again. That same electric pull. "Monroe," he said carefully, "I don't want to misread this situation, but I feel like there's something happening here." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "You're not misreading it. I'm not usually this forward," he continued. "But life's too short to pretend. Is there any chance you'd want to get coffee sometime? Really get to know each other?" I should have said no. I'd been alone for 6 years. I'd convinced myself I was done with all of this, that the rest of my life would be quiet and solitary and fine. Romance was for other people, younger people, people who hadn't already used up their chance at love. But standing there with Larry, feeling more alive than I had in years, I couldn't make myself say no. I gave Larry my number before we went back inside. We stood on the porch, phones out, typing carefully. His hand shook slightly. So did mine. "I'll text you," he said. "Okay." We returned to the reception separately, a few minutes apart, like we were doing something illicit. In a way, maybe we were, not because either of us was committed elsewhere, but because what I felt standing next to him seemed too intense, too immediate. You weren't supposed to feel this way about a stranger. The rest of the evening I was useless for conversation. I danced with Ivy's aunt because she asked. I ate a piece of wedding cake I didn't taste. I congratulated the newlyweds a dozen times. And through it all, I was aware of Larry across the room, nursing his drink, talking politely to Fletcher's cousins, occasionally catching my eye. Around 10 o'clock, guests started leaving. Ivy and Fletcher were staying at the venue's honeymoon cottage overnight before flying to Costa Rica in the morning. I hugged my daughter goodbye, kissed her forehead, told her I loved her. "Thanks for everything, Dad," she said. "Are you okay? You seem distracted tonight?" "I'm fine," I lied. "Just emotional." "You know," she squeezed my hand. "I know. I miss her too." I left before the last guests departed, suddenly desperate for solitude to process whatever had happened. I drove home through dark country roads, windows down, trying to clear my head. My house was in Evansville's Lincoln neighborhood, a quiet area of modest ranch homes built in the 60s. Renee and I had bought it when Ivy was 3. We'd painted every room ourselves, refinished the hardwood floors, planted the dogwood tree in the front yard that was now taller than the roof. I'd thought about selling after Renee died. But Ivy had begged me not to. This was her childhood home, full of memories of her mother. So I'd stayed, alone in 3 bedrooms, and 400 square feet that felt cavernous without Renee's presence filling them. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the quiet house. The living room looked exactly as I'd left it that morning. Coffee mug on the side table, newspaper folded on the couch. Everything in its place, nothing out of order, my life arranged in careful stasis. I loosened my tie and poured myself a glass of water. My phone buzzed, an unknown number. A text. "Hi, it's Larry. I know it's late, but I wanted to say it was really good to meet you tonight. I meant what I said about coffee." I stared at the screen, my pulse accelerating. I typed a response, deleted it, typed another. "It was good to meet you, too. I'd like that. Coffee, I mean." The reply came almost immediately. "How about Monday? There's a place called Hacienda on Main Street. Does 10 work? Monday was 2 days away. I had the day off. 10 works. Great. See you then. I set the phone down and stood in my kitchen, breathing carefully. This was real. I was going to see him again. I was going to have coffee with a man I'd met at my daughter's wedding, a man I couldn't stop thinking about, a man whose grief matched my own. I didn't sleep much that night. Monday morning, I changed clothes 3 times before settling on jeans and a blue button-down. Casual but put together. I arrived at Hacienda at 9:55, parked, sat in my truck for 2 minutes giving myself a pep talk. This is just coffee. You can handle coffee? Larry was already inside, seated at a table by the window. He saw me come in and stood, smiling tentatively. He wore khakis and a gray Henley that made his eyes look more green than brown. "Hi," he said. "Hi." We sat. A waitress appeared, took our orders. Coffee for both of us, black. After she left, there was a beat of awkward silence. "I'm not sure I know how to do this," Larry admitted. "I've been out of practice for a long time." "Me too," I said, relieved by his honesty. "I haven't been on a date in 30 years. Is this a date?" he asked, eyebrows rising. "I don't know. Is it?" "I'd like it to be," he said carefully. "If that's okay." My chest tightened. "That's okay." We smiled at each other, the tension easing slightly. The coffee arrived. We talked. At first, the conversation was cautious, surface level. He told me about his work. He was a technical coordinator for a nonprofit focused on sustainable agriculture, a job that had transferred with him from Portland to a new office in Bloomington. I told him about the distribution center, about coordinating shipments of tractors and combines and irrigation equipment to farms across 5 states. "How long have you been doing that?" he asked. 23 years. Started as a warehouse manager, worked my way up. "Do you like it?" I considered. "I'm good at it. It keeps me busy. I don't know if I'd say I like it exactly." He nodded. "I get that." We moved to deeper topics gradually. He told me about his late partner, a man named Julian who'd been a high school art teacher. They'd been together 16 years. Julian had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and died 8 months later. "The last few months were awful," Larry said, staring into his coffee. "He was in so much pain. Toward the end, I just wanted it to be over for his sake, which made me feel like a monster." "You're not a monster," I said. "That's love. Wanting someone's suffering to end." He looked up at me, eyes bright. "Thank you for saying that." I told him about Renee, how she'd been a 3rd-grade teacher, beloved by her students. How she'd fought so hard, enduring round after round of chemo that made her violently ill. How at the very end, she'd asked me to promise I wouldn't spend the rest of my life alone. "Did you promise?" Larry asked. "I did, but I didn't believe I could keep it. And now?" I met his gaze. "Now I'm not sure." We sat there, 2 widowers in a coffee shop on a Monday morning, the weight of our losses hanging between us like something solid. But underneath the grief was something else, something tentative and fragile and terrifyingly hopeful. We talked for 2 hours. The waitress refilled our coffee 3 times. Eventually, the lunch crowd started arriving, and we realized we'd monopolized the table. "I should probably let you go," Larry said reluctantly. "I don't have anywhere to be," I admitted. "Neither do I. Do you want to take a walk? There's that Riverfront trail by the casino." We drove separately to the trailhead and walked along the Ohio River, the water brown and sluggish in the June heat. Conversation came easier now. We talked about books we'd read, places we'd traveled. He asked about Ivy, and I found myself telling stories from her childhood, memories I usually kept locked away because they hurt too much. "She sounds wonderful," Larry said. "She is. She's the best thing I ever did." "Do you think you'll tell her about this? About us?" The question caught me off guard. "I don't know. Is there an us to tell her about?" He stopped walking and turned to face me. We were on a quiet stretch of trail, trees overhead, the river flowing beside us. "I'd like there to be," he said. "If you would," my heart hammered. "Larry, I haven't done this in so long. I don't know if I remember how, and I'm scared, honestly. Scared of getting hurt again. Scared of losing someone else." "I'm scared too," he said. "Terrified, actually. But I keep thinking about what you said at the wedding, about your wife not being there to see it, about building a life together." He stepped closer. "We both know how short life can be, how quickly everything can be taken away. Maybe that means we should be more careful. Or maybe it means we should take the chance while we have it." I couldn't breathe. He was so close I could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, could smell his cologne, something clean and woody. "I want to take the chance," I said. He smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "Yeah? Yeah. Can I kiss you?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. He kissed me carefully, gently, his hand coming up to cup the side of my face. It was soft and sweet and nothing like kissing Renee, but that was okay. This was different. This was new. When we broke apart, I was trembling. "Okay?" he asked. More than okay. We walked back to the parking lot holding hands. It felt monumental and also completely natural, like something I'd been doing my whole life. Over the next few weeks, we fell into a pattern. Coffee dates, long walks, dinners at quiet restaurants where we could talk for hours. Larry lived in a small rental house in Bloomington, about an hour north. Sometimes I'd drive up after work and we'd cook dinner together. Other times he'd come to Evansville and we'd catch a movie or just sit on my back deck talking until midnight. It was slow and intentional and utterly consuming. I thought about him constantly. At work, I'd find myself staring at my phone, waiting for his texts. I started leaving the office on time instead of staying late, eager to see him. My coworkers noticed. "You seem different lately," my assistant manager said one afternoon. "Different how?" "Happier." "It's nice." I was happy, I realized. For the first time since Renee died, I felt like I was living instead of just existing. But I still hadn't told Ivy. She called regularly from her honeymoon, sending photos of rainforests and beaches, gushing about Costa Rica. I listened and asked questions and didn't mention that I was seeing someone. It felt too new, too fragile to share. When she and Fletcher returned in early July, she invited me to dinner at their new apartment in Bloomington. They'd moved in together just before the wedding, a cozy 2-bedroom near Indiana University's campus. I arrived with a bottle of wine and a housewarming gift, a set of kitchen knives Ivy had mentioned wanting. Fletcher answered the door, gave me a warm hug, led me inside. Ivy was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove. She turned and beamed when she saw me. "Dad, come see the place." She gave me the tour. It was charming, full of their combined belongings and the particular energy of newlyweds figuring out how to share space. Photos from the wedding sat on the mantel. Ivy's teaching certificates hung in the hallway beside Fletcher's engineering degree. We ate dinner on their small balcony, overlooking a tree-lined street. They told stories from the honeymoon. I asked about their plans, their jobs, their adjustment to married life. "What about you?" Ivy asked eventually. "What have you been up to?" This was my opening. I should tell her. But the words stuck in my throat. Work mostly. "Same as always." Ivy gave me a look I couldn't quite read. "Really? Nothing new?" "Why do you ask?" "Fletcher's uncle mentioned he'd run into you a couple times. I just thought maybe you'd made a friend." My stomach dropped. I glanced at Fletcher, who was carefully studying his wine glass. "We've gotten coffee a few times," I said carefully. "He's nice." "He is nice," Ivy agreed. "I'm glad." "You should have friends, Dad. You spend too much time alone." I nodded, relieved and also vaguely guilty. She thought Larry was just a friend. And I was letting her think that because I was too much of a coward to tell her the truth. After dinner, I helped with dishes, hugged them both goodbye, drove home feeling unsettled. Larry called as I was pulling into my driveway. "How was dinner?" he asked. "Good. Complicated. They know we've been seeing each other, but Ivy thinks we're just friends." "Did you correct her?" "No." Silence. "Then, are you ashamed of me?" "What? No. God, no." "Then why haven't you told her?" I parked and sat in the truck, phone pressed to my ear. "I don't know. I guess I'm worried about how she'll react. Renee was her mother. Maybe she'll think I'm trying to replace her." "Are you trying to replace her?" "Of course not." "You know that's not what this is." "I do know that," Larry said gently. "But does Ivy?" I rubbed my face, exhausted. "I'll tell her. Soon." "Okay, I trust you." We talked a while longer, and by the time we hung up, I felt better. But the guilt lingered. I did need to tell Ivy. She deserved to know. And the longer I waited, the harder it would be. The following Saturday, Larry and I drove to Brown County State Park for a hike. It was a beautiful day, hot but breezy, the forests thick and green. We walked for miles, talking and laughing, stopping occasionally to drink water or admire the view. At a scenic overlook, we sat on a bench, catching our breath. "I've been thinking," Larry said, "about us, about what this is." My heart rate picked up. "Okay, I know we're taking things slow, and I respect that, but I want you to know that I'm serious about this, about you. This isn't casual for me." "It's not casual for me either," I said. "Good." He took my hand. "Because I'm falling in love with you, Monroe. And I needed you to know that." I stared at him, my chest tight. No one had said those words to me in 6 years. I thought I'd never hear them again. "I'm falling in love with you too," I whispered. He kissed me there on the overlook, and it felt like a promise. On the drive back to Evansville, I decided I'd tell Ivy the next day. I'd invite her to lunch, sit her down, explain everything. She'd understand. She had to. But when I got home, there was a message on my voicemail from Ivy. "Hey, Dad. It's me. Can you call me when you get this? It's important." I called immediately. She answered on the first ring. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Nothing's wrong exactly. I just need to talk to you about something. Can you come by tomorrow?" "Of course." "What's this about?" "I'd rather talk in person." My stomach twisted with anxiety. "Ivy, you're scaring me." "Don't be scared. Just come over around noon, okay?" I agreed and hung up, my mind racing. What could this be about? The next day I drove to Bloomington, my nerves frayed. Ivy met me at the door alone. "Fletcher was at work," she explained. "She'd wanted to talk to me privately." We sat on the couch, and she turned to face me, her expression serious. "I'm just going to say this," she began. "I know you're seeing Larry, and I don't mean as friends." My face went hot. "Ivy, let me finish. Fletcher saw you two at a restaurant last week. You were holding hands. He didn't want to tell me at first, but I made him. I felt like I'd been punched. I was going to tell you. I just didn't know how." "Why didn't you think you could tell me?" she asked. And she sounded hurt. "Because I didn't want you to think I was trying to replace your mother," I said miserably. "Dad?" She took my hand. "I would never think that. Mom is irreplaceable, but she's gone. And you're still here, and you deserve to be happy." Tears burned my eyes. "You're not upset?" "I'm not upset that you're seeing someone. I'm a little upset that you didn't feel like you could tell me." She squeezed my hand. "But mostly I'm happy for you. Larry seems like a good person." "He is," I said, my voice breaking. "He's wonderful." "Then why are we even having this conversation?" "Go be with him. Be happy." I pulled her into a hug, overcome. "I love you so much." "I love you too, Dad." When I left Bloomington an hour later, I felt like a weight had been lifted. Ivy knew. She approved. I could move forward without guilt. I called Larry from the car. "I told Ivy," I said when he answered. Well, technically, she already knew. But we talked. She's happy for us. Really? He sounded relieved. Really? So what does that mean for us? I smiled. It means I don't have to hide how I feel about you anymore. Larry and I spent the rest of that summer getting to know each other in the open. We went on actual dates, held hands in public, stopped worrying about who might see us. It felt liberating. Ivy and Fletcher invited us to dinner in early August. It was slightly awkward at first. Larry was technically Fletcher's uncle, which made the family dynamics complicated, but we settled into an easy rhythm. Ivy asked Larry about his work, and he asked her about teaching. Fletcher told a funny story about a project at the county. I sat back and watched the people I loved most getting along, and felt profoundly grateful. After dinner, Ivy cornered me in the kitchen while I helped with dishes. "He makes you happy," she said. It wasn't a question. "He does? Then I'm happy too." I kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for being okay with this." "Of course I'm okay with it." "You deserve love, Dad. You've always deserved it." In September, Larry's lease ended and he decided not to renew. We'd been spending most nights together anyway, alternating between his place and mine. It seemed natural to ask him to move in. "Are you sure?" he asked when I brought it up. "That's a big step." "I'm sure," I said. "I want you here. I want to wake up with you every morning." He moved in on a warm Saturday in late September. We carried boxes from the truck to the house, filling the empty spaces with his belongings. His books joined mine on the shelves. His clothes hung in the closet next to mine. His coffee mugs filled the cabinet. That night, we stood in the bedroom that had been mine alone for 6 years and was now ours. "How does it feel?" Larry asked. "Right," I said. "It feels right." We settled into domestic life together. He worked from home most days, set up an office in what had been Ivy's old bedroom. I'd come home from the distribution center to find him at the kitchen table, laptop open, on a video call with colleagues in Bloomington or Indianapolis, or sometimes his old office in Portland. He'd smile when he saw me, mouth high, keep working while I changed and started dinner. We cooked together most evenings. He was better at it than I was, more creative and willing to experiment. I usually handled the practical parts, chopping vegetables, setting the table, cleaning up. We'd eat and talk about our days, then watch a movie or read on the couch, his feet in my lap, comfortable silence filling the house. It was ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. After so many years alone, having someone to share the mundane details of life with felt miraculous. We had our first real fight in October. Something stupid, I can't even remember what triggered it, but it escalated quickly. Voices raised. Old wounds torn open. I said something cruel about how maybe he was using me to avoid dealing with his grief over Julian. He said maybe I was so emotionally shut down that I didn't know how to be in a real relationship anymore. We went to bed angry, lying on opposite sides of the mattress, not touching. I didn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I felt him shift beside me. "Monroe?" His voice was small in the darkness. "Yeah? I'm sorry. I didn't mean what I said. I'm sorry, too. I was an ass." He moved closer. I met him in the middle. We held each other and whispered apologies and promises until we both fell asleep. In the morning, we talked it through properly. We agreed to be more careful with each other, more aware of the tender places we each carried. The fight had been awful, but coming through it together made us stronger. Thanksgiving we spent with Ivy and Fletcher. They hosted at their apartment, Ivy cooking a turkey that was slightly dry, but made with so much love it didn't matter. Larry brought a green bean casserole and homemade rolls. Fletcher's parents were conspicuously absent, still not reconciled with Larry, but Fletcher's cousin came, and one of Ivy's college friends who didn't have family nearby. We crowded around the small dining table, passing dishes and telling stories. At one point, Ivy raised her glass. "I want to make a toast," she said. "This year has been full of changes. New marriages, new relationships, new beginnings. I'm grateful for all of it. And I'm especially grateful that my dad found someone who makes him smile like this. She nodded at me and Larry. To family, in all its forms. To family, we echoed. I caught Larry's eye across the table. He smiled, and I felt my heart expand. In December, Larry asked if I wanted to visit Portland with him. He needed to close out his old apartment, deal with some final paperwork from Julian's estate. I requested time off from work, and we flew out the week before Christmas. Portland was cold and rainy, the city gray and green and beautiful in a melancholy way. We stayed in a hotel downtown. During the day, Larry met with lawyers and real estate agents while I explored the city, wandering Powell's bookstore and the waterfront, drinking coffee in cafes where Larry and Julian had probably sat together. He took me to their old apartment in the Pearl District. It was mostly empty, just a few boxes left to sort through. I hung back while he went through them, pulling out photos and books and small mementos. He found a framed picture of Julian and sat on the floor, staring at it. I sat beside him. "Tell me about him," I said. So he did. He told me about how they'd met at a fundraiser for arts education, how Julian had made him laugh so hard he'd snorted wine out his nose, how they'd moved in together after 3 months, because it felt ridiculous to maintain 2 apartments when they spent every night together anyway. How Julian had proposed on a hiking trip to the Columbia River Gorge, both of them muddy and exhausted and deliriously happy. "He would have liked you," Larry said, setting the photo down carefully. "He always said I needed someone steady, someone grounded." "I would have liked him too," I said. We sat there on the floor of the empty apartment, holding hands, honoring the life Larry had built here before everything changed. That night, back at the hotel, Larry was quiet. We lay in bed and he curled against me, his head on my chest. "Thank you for coming here with me," he said. "I don't think I could have done this alone." "You don't have to do anything alone anymore," I told him. He tilted his face up and kissed me, slow and deep. We made love carefully, tenderly, taking our time. Afterward, he fell asleep in my arms, and I lay awake feeling the weight and warmth of him, thinking about how love could hurt and heal in equal measure. We flew home on Christmas Eve. Ivy had invited us to spend Christmas Day with her and Fletcher. We arrived at their apartment mid-morning, arms full of gifts. The place smelled like cinnamon and pine. They'd put up a small tree, decorated with a chaotic mix of ornaments. We exchanged gifts. Ivy gave me a framed photo from the wedding, me and her dancing during the father-daughter dance, both of us teary-eyed and smiling. I gave her a set of art supplies for her classroom. Larry and Fletcher exchanged books they'd each recommended. It was warm and easy and felt like family. After lunch, Ivy pulled out a board game, and we spent the afternoon playing and arguing over rules and laughing until our sides hurt. At some point, I looked around the room, at my daughter and her husband, at the man I loved, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was more than I thought I'd have again. More than I'd let myself hope for. New Year's Eve, we spent quietly at home. We made dinner together. Steak and roasted vegetables and a bottle of red wine Larry had been saving. We ate by candlelight, talking about the year behind us and the year ahead. At midnight, we stood on the back deck, bundled in coats, watching fireworks bloom over the neighborhood. "What are you hoping for this year?" Larry asked. "More of this," I said. "More time with you. More ordinary days." "That's a good hope," he said. He kissed me as the last fireworks faded, and I thought about how a year ago I'd been alone, convinced my life was settled into its final shape. And now, everything was different, expanded, full of possibility. In February, Larry got a promotion at work, a regional director position that came with more responsibility and better pay. We celebrated with dinner at a nice restaurant in downtown Evansville. The kind of place Renee and I used to save up for on anniversaries. I'm proud of you, I told him over dessert. Thank you for supporting me through the job search, he said. I know I was stressed and distracted for a while there. That's what partners do, I said. He smiled. Partners. I like that. In March, my company restructured and offered early retirement packages to senior employees. I was 54, not ready to stop working entirely, but the package was generous. I could take it, collect a pension, maybe find part-time work doing something I actually enjoyed. I talked it over with Larry. We sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, running the numbers, looking at our combined finances. I think you should take it, he said finally. You've been talking about wanting a change. This is your chance. What would I do with all that free time? Whatever you want. That's the whole point. I accepted the package in early April. My last day at the distribution center was the end of May. They threw me a small retirement party, cake and speeches and a plaque thanking me for 23 years of service. I shook hands with people I'd worked alongside for decades and felt surprisingly little sadness about leaving. On my first day of retirement, I woke up with no alarm, made coffee, sat on the back deck watching birds at the feeder. Larry found me there an hour later. How does it feel? He asked, handing me a fresh cup. Strange, good, a little scary. What do you want to do today? I considered. I don't know, anything, everything, nothing. We ended up driving to Brown County, hiking the same trail where Larry had told me he loved me a year ago. It felt full circle, a bookend to that moment. In June, Ivy called with news. She was pregnant, due in February. I was going to be a grandfather. I cried when she told me. Happy tears this time. She and Fletcher came over that evening, and we celebrated with sparkling cider and takeout from her favorite Thai restaurant. I wish Mom could be here for this, Ivy said quietly at one point. Me too, I said, but she'd be so happy. She always wanted to be a grandmother. Larry squeezed my hand under the table. That summer, I started volunteering at a literacy nonprofit in Evansville, tutoring adults who were learning to read. It was challenging and rewarding in ways my old job had never been. I came home energized, full of stories about the people I was working with. Larry and I took a trip in August, driving up to Michigan to spend a week on Lake Superior. We rented a cabin outside of Marquette, spent our days hiking and kayaking and reading on the beach. At night, we cooked simple meals and sat on the porch watching the sunset over the water. One evening, Larry said, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I turned to look at him. Is that a proposal? Do you want it to be? My heart was pounding. Yes, he smiled. Then yes. Monroe, will you marry me? Yes, I said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, absolutely. We didn't have rings. We hadn't planned this. But it didn't matter. We held each other on the porch of a rented cabin in Michigan and made promises we intended to keep. We told Ivy when we got back. She screamed and hugged us both and immediately started planning an engagement party. Fletcher shook our hands formally and then pulled us into a group hug. We decided on a small ceremony in the spring, just family and close friends. Nothing elaborate. We'd both done the big wedding before. This time, we wanted simple and intimate and true. In September, Larry's brother reached out. Fletcher had apparently been working on him, trying to repair the family rift. He sent a tentative email, apologizing for the things he'd said years ago, asking if they could talk. Larry was wary, but hopeful. They met for coffee in Bloomington. I didn't go. This was something Larry needed to do on his own. When he came home, he looked drained but lighter. How did it go? I asked. It was hard. But good, I think. He apologized. Really apologized, not just lip service. We have a long way to go, but it's a start. By November, they were having regular phone calls. In December, Larry's brother and sister-in-law invited us to Thanksgiving at their house. It was awkward at times, but everyone was trying. That was what mattered. Ivy's pregnancy progressed. We went to doctor's appointments with her when Fletcher had to work. We helped set up the nursery in their second bedroom. We bought tiny clothes and stuffed animals and books we couldn't wait to read to our grandchild. On Valentine's Day, Larry and I went to the courthouse in Evansville and got married. Just us, Ivy and Fletcher as witnesses, and a judge who'd agreed to perform the ceremony. I wore a suit. Larry wore a suit. We said our vows in a small office that smelled like old paper and new beginnings. Afterward, we went to lunch at Hacienda, the coffee shop where we'd had our first date. We sat at the same table by the window and toasted each other with coffee mugs. "How does it feel to be married?" Ivy asked. "Right," I said, looking at Larry. "It feels right." 2 weeks later, on a snowy morning in late February, Ivy went into labor. Fletcher called us at 6 in the morning and we met them at the hospital. 15 hours later, our granddaughter was born, 7 pounds 4 ounces. Dark hair like Ivy's. Fletcher's nose. They named her Renee. I held her in the hospital room, this tiny, perfect person, and felt the past and future collapse into a single moment. My wife's name carried forward. My daughter's joy. My own second chance at happiness. Larry stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, looking down at the baby with wonder. "Hello, Renee," I whispered. "I'm your grandpa, and this is your grandpa, Larry." The baby yawned. Ivy laughed, exhausted and radiant. Fletcher took photos. Larry kissed my temple. Outside the hospital window, snow fell softly over Evansville, covering everything in quiet white. And I thought about how a year and a half ago I'd stood at my daughter's wedding feeling like my life was over, like all the good parts were behind me. But I'd been wrong. The good parts were still happening. Love was still possible. Joy still waited around unexpected corners. I'd locked eyes with a stranger across a crowded room and everything had changed. And now here I was. Married again, a grandfather, surrounded by family, holding the future in my arms while the man I loved stood beside me, steady and sure and mine. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning again in ways I never could have imagined. And I was ready for all of it. The ordinary days and the extraordinary moments, the grief that would always be part of me and the joy that was learning to live alongside it. I looked at Larry and smiled. He smiled back, understanding everything I couldn't say. We'd both survived the worst. We'd both learned that love doesn't replace what you've lost. It just makes room for something new. Different, but no less real, and that was enough.